And as a prompt for our conversation segment, which is on matters arising from the Afghanistan crisis, let's now take this background report put together by Abdulsalam Jibril.
This image sent shockwaves around the world, and it would surely linger in the memories of many. It was a momentous moment that has since signified the fall of Kabul, with the United States President Joe Biden's order for full withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan, which began on the 1st of May this year and completed just yesterday. The Taliban, who were dethroned 20 years ago, are filling the vacuum. Analysts have drawn attention to the historical antecedents of Afghanistan, which is known as the graveyard of empires. Over time, the Mongolian Empire, the Mughal Empire, the British, the Soviet Union, and the United States have failed in all attempts to invade and occupy the country. For the past 20 years, since the United States and its allies overthrew the Taliban as a result of the 9/11 attacks, each of the last 4 presidents of the United States has tried to end America's longest war. Those 2 decades have seen more than 2,300 U.S. military lives lost, tens of thousands of U.S. wounded, countless Afghan casualties, and more than $2 trillion in taxpayers' money spent. Some international affairs analysts maintain that the Taliban takeover will have some global implications, such as human rights challenges going by their antecedents while it held sway from 1996 to 2001. They also insist that with the Taliban in power, the world might witness a resurgence of extremist groups in Asia, the Middle East, and in Africa, as well as the spillover of weapons through illegal means to countries with extremist networks such as Al-Qaeda, ISIS, ISWAP, and Boko Haram.
Many thanks, Abdulsalam Jibril, for that background report. Now, joining us to discuss this subject matter, we have guests here in the Abuja studios and also guests who are joining us via Zoom. First, let's welcome Professor Estefanos Zabade. He's a professor of international relations and dean of the School of Postgraduate Studies at Bingham University, Karu, in Nasarawa State, pretty close to us here in the Federal Capital Territory. Professor Zabade, delighted to have you this morning.
Thank you very much. Good morning, viewers.
Also here with us in the studios is Dr. Clement Aduku. Dr. Clement Aduku was Nigeria's envoy at some point to the Russian Federation and the Republic of Ukraine. He is currently Director General of Palmas Academy and Continuing Education and Research Center here in Abuja. Dr. Clement Aduku, delighted to have you this morning.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
And via Zoom from Lagos, we have Professor Bola Akintarewa. He's a former Director General, Nigeria Institute of International Affairs. And thank you, sir, for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Also via Zoom from California in the U.S. is Ambassador Dauda Danladi, former Nigerian High Commissioner to Pakistan. Good to have you join us all the way from the U.S.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right, very clear signals there on the Zoom connections that we have. Ambassador Dauda Danladi, we have to apologize because we know that at this time you are 8 hours behind us, which is around about midnight where you are in California. So we really appreciate your being up to be part of this conversation. And in addition to the introduction by my colleague, Kirian, we also would like to add that you were at some point secretary to the Borno state government. So you are from Borno, and Of course, matters that we'll be discussing today will have some linkage with what is unfolding in Afghanistan. Let's begin with you, Ambassador Dauda Danladi. Of course, as it were, Afghanistan has once again lived up to its reputation, some would say, as the graveyard of the big pass, the United States being the latest to fall after 2 decades of intervention. What are you seeing in Afghanistan and elsewhere in the world?
Thank you very much. I think I will crave your indulgence to recall the interview that was granted to us when I took the NTA crew to Kabul and met President Hamid Karzai. He agreed based on the emerging challenges posed by Boko Haram insurgency in Nigeria. That was in 2013. And what he said was that Afghanistan was a beautiful country. Afghanistan was bubbling with life. Afghanistan got her independence as far back as 1921 with a long, rich history. He went on to say that Afghanistan proven mineral resources, especially the precious emeralds and lithium, coal, oil, is estimated to the tune of about $3 trillion US, and that could have been enough to develop Afghanistan. He said, but unfortunately, Afghanistan, because of their deep ethnicity, religious differences and ideologies, were naive. They allowed foreign intervention into their country, and that gave birth to the rise of the Taliban, which became factionalized into about 39 terrorist organizations. Few among them, the Tariq-in-Taliban in Pakistan, the Haqqani Network, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and the Lashkar-e-Islam. All these groups contributed to the destruction of Afghanistan. And he said, it is quite surprising and should be a source of concern to all Nigerians that they hear media reports of incessant bomb blasts in Nigeria, suicide bombing, the rise of Boko Haram, religious intolerance, ethnic clashes, farmers-herders clashes. And he said, Nigeria is gradually toeing the steps of Afghanistan. And if care and Nigerians do not rise to stem the tide of ethnicity and religious intolerance in Nigeria, then Nigeria could fall into the same trap that Afghanistan fell. Now, what he has said reflects what is currently going on, especially in the African continent. Most of the crises and the challenges that the African continent has been facing are connected to the issue of ethnicity, religious intolerance, exclusion of people from socio-economic and political processes, poverty, corruption, inept leadership. These have underdeveloped the African continent. Now, the situation as it is right now in Kabul is very fluid. The Americans have gone, and in the struggle by the Taliban, as you know, the Taliban are populated by Pashtun tribes. 15 million of them are in Afghanistan, and they're the majority tribe, while about 43 million of them are living along the borders of Pakistan with Afghanistan. And that is why there was the Tariq-in-Taliban of Pakistan, the Haqqani Network, and the Lashkar-e-Islam and other groups, and Al-Qaeda and ISIS, for the past 20 years have been supporting their brothers, their kids in Afghanistan up to the demise, the unfortunate demise of the government that was put in by the United States and the coalition forces. And that was why Kabul fell to the shock of the entire international community. But however, the danger point now is, as long as the international community do not rise to make sure that there is an inclusive government in Kabul, these groups that have been assisting Taliban, already the ISIS-K, a faction of the ISIS, who are looking at the Taliban that they are a little bit moderate and perhaps they are toying the ways and the political process. They may tow the Western and political process, are already waging a war against the Taliban. The Northern Alliance in the Panjshir Valley, which is now led by the deposed Vice President of Afghanistan, Amirul Saleh, and Mossad, one of the warlords in Panjshir Valley, are forming the Northern Alliance, and to some extent being supported by Tajikistan, because the minority groups comprises of Tagish and Uzbekistan. And there is also the remote possibility that that particular group is also being assisted by Tajikistan, and as well as remotely India. So what it means is that there's going to be a civil war if care is not taken, and it will pave way for the emergence, because extremism thrives in disorder. Extremism will have safe haven where there is a system failure, where in the first states. So it is expected that if that scenario plays out, there will be a rise in international terrorism. And already the Western countries are developing strategies for counter-terrorism. In addition, illicit trafficking of drugs will also be on the increase. Looking at the menace of drugs, especially among our youth in Nigeria.
Right, Ambassador Dauda Danladi, thank you very much indeed for that background that you just painted, because it shows that you have a good knowledge of Afghanistan as a nation. I was going to ask you actually what will become of those groups you mentioned now that the Taliban has taken over power, because the expectation of many experts is that, look, if care is not taken, there could be civil war in Afghanistan, as you also mentioned. We will return to you in the course of the conversation. But let us go to Professor Bola Akinterewa. Prof. Akinterewa, you have listened to Ambassador Dauda Danladi giving us a backgrounder to what actually played out in Afghanistan. Now, the U.S. and the allied groups, that's the NATO, have all left Afghanistan. What do you make of that nation that has been going through wars in the past 40 years? What do you make of it, and what ripple effect will that have with respect to what is going on now in the Sahel, which of course Nigeria is part of?
The ambassador cannot be more correct, especially on the basis of the 4 or 5 points on which he placed emphasis. The first point he made that I found quite beautiful is the need for inclusive government, without which certainly the imminence of a civil war will become inevitable. He also said that extremism thrives normally on the basis of disorder. Theoretically, logically, he's quite correct. And when he said that Nigeria is already treading on the path of the Afghanistan, raising the issue of religious intolerance, talking about ethnicity, talking about, mutual intolerance at the level of political governance, I think that he's quite correct. He mentioned the issue of
there's a freeze there from the Zoom connection to Professor Bola Akintarewa. Professor Bola Akintarewa, we're sorry, we appear to have lost you, but I do hope that once you are back, we will get your comments. Let's get into our studios now here in Abuja. Dr. Clement Aduku, we earlier introduced him. It was Nigeria's envoy to the Russian Federation. And as we all know, the Russians, that's the former Soviet Union, also had their misadventure in Afghanistan. They got their nose thoroughly bloodied, even though many would say that on that occasion, they seem to also to have been sabotaged in the Cold War era by the other big power, namely the US. But Dr. Clement Aduku, just give us your own reading of what has played out and what is still playing out in Afghanistan. I'm sure the Russians will be quietly celebrating now that just as well, that the Americans have also received their comeuppance.
Thank you very much. The situation as it has unfolded, or is still unfolding, gives everybody a very huge reason to be worried and concerned. The Russian Federation, especially after the demise of the defunct Soviet USSR, they created what they call CIS states, Commonwealth of Independent States, 15 of them, of course, with Russia being at the head. And each of these splinter groups or countries from the former Soviet Union, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Azerbaijan, and several others, stay within that defunct Soviet Union enclave. And in 2013, precisely, I remember, there was this terrorist attack in several other parts of the Soviet, of Russia as it is now. And then it gave a lot of people concern because in Chechnya, for example, the people there took to arms, we have a very huge Muslim population, and the Russians did all they could within that time to suppress that insurgency and uprising. And not only that, in the railway station not too far away from where the embassy of Nigeria was located then, Ulisa Maliskaya, number 13, there was a bomb blast in the substation there too that killed a lot of people. So the issue of terrorism as it affects the Russians has never given them a second to relax or to rest in their hours thinking that it is all over. It's a consistent and a continuous exercise on their part to make sure that extremism of any type does not shatter the economy and then the shattered political system of Afghanistan, but not directly recognizing the Taliban government as at now. So that is why we get worried that when this incident continues to unfold in this form, it does not portend any good news for anybody, especially among the superpowers, considering the rivalry that had been age-long between the United States of America and the Russian Federation. In this regard, it is expected that we watch and see how these altercations and counter-altercations play out, considering the fact that Russia certainly would try to have, Russia and China especially would want to get closer and closer to the new Taliban government and see how they can forge cooperation and, any other form of understanding that will help the new Taliban government establish itself and then begin to govern in whatever modality they may find necessary and convenient for them.
Yes, just to add to what you said, in July, the leaders of the Taliban I had a meeting with the Chinese authorities, so with respect to that, even before the field adventure of Americans in Afghanistan just last week. Now let's bring in Professor Stefanos Zabadi. Let's get your own take as to what has played out, and as constantly said, is still playing out in Afghanistan, because the country seems to be fluid at the moment. Now we have a record of over 4 or 5 other groups, operating as terrorists in that country. Taliban, of course, has taken the lead because they fought the war that they actually ended America's adventure in that country.
Yes, I think when you look at, I've seen 2 write-ups so far. From the American side, there's this special report on the lessons they learned or should learn from Afghanistan, which clearly stated that the Americans did a lot of blunders in Afghanistan. And in fact, they didn't have a clear strategic objective which they pursued today. They started first by fighting Al-Qaeda. Then they moved into reconstruction. Then it now moved into trying to set up the Taliban, the governance system in Afghanistan, not Taliban. Then they moved into other areas, setting up a military force created or fashioned after the image of the United States and so on. And that each time this had gone on, some other dynamics that were internal. Americans who came were not the most qualified. That mixed with the Afghan situation. We're talking about ethnic and religious differences, but there are also cronyism and corruption within the system, just as Ambassador Dandali mentioned. And that led to the draining of resources that were brought in to develop this infrastructure and human resources into private pockets. The Americans did not take time to study the Afghan societies, to understand the nuances, their culture and ways of doing things. And so they were quietly sabotaged by those they call the power mongers within the country. So at the end of the day, where we are now is that Afghanistan has hardly moved from where it was 40 years ago. I think, unfortunately for the Taliban or whichever government comes in, they are going to start from the scratch, because you needed a human capital that had been developed that could, run on, hit the ground running in terms of the new Afghanistan that should unfold. But they will have shortage of critical skills to help in that direction. That's what I imagine would happen, and that now informs the kind of the drama that the ambassador was talking about. The Chinese are coming. The Russians are interested. I mean, neighbors are gearing up. Iran, Pakistan, even India. Afghanistan is not going to be left alone, for good or for ill. I'm not even sure that the Americans have gone. They will be there by proxy. The only thing I see is that the strategic objectives have changed. And if you listen to President Biden yesterday, he was talking about, they don't have vital interests in Afghanistan. So for me, the issue is the national interest that a country pursues at any point in time. That determines, how they behave. And the Americans have shifted to some other things now. So Afghanistan is not important in that respect.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Stefanos Zabadi, for your comments. Let's return to Ambassador Dauda. Ambassador Dauda Danladi is not... all right, so the 2 Zoom connections, we understand we can't immediately get back to them. But let's bring in again Dr. Clement Adugu. Dr. Clement Adugu, you were saying something earlier about the, shall we say, overtures by the immediate neighbors. Now, China and Russia to the Taliban. The Taliban, as it were, they are both, as we say in international law, the de facto government and the de jure government in Afghanistan. Is this now a question of geostrategic interests for the big powers? Because Professor Estefanos also draws attention to the fact that Pakistan, of course, cannot turn a blind eye to what's happening to their immediate neighbors. Iran is also keen. Is this going to be a new turf, as it were, for regional competitiveness, if not supremacy determination? And what consequences that will have for the rest of the world, particularly for us in Nigeria?
Thank you very much. There is a very obvious paradigm shift in the evolving political situation in Afghanistan.
Okay, I'm sorry, Kieran, we're just getting, I'm sorry, Dr. Aduku, we'll have to pause you, because we understand that we've been able to get back on the Zoom connection. Both Professor Bola Akintarewa, I believe, and Ambassador Dauda Danladi. Professor Bola Akintarewa, sorry we lost you fairly early on while you were still seeking to, give an executive summary of Danladi's propositions, and then before you launch into yours. Let's have your own take now. I believe you've been monitoring us offline. Oh, my goodness. All right. Dr. Aduku, we are back to you in the studios.
Thank you very much. Like I said a while ago, there is a paradigm shift in the evolving political situation in Afghanistan, occasioned by this withdrawal of the Allied forces led by the United States of America, of course, and what next one should expect in Afghanistan. Just yesterday, I listened to the spokesman of the Taliban. His name is Zubahirul Mujahid, who said, in his own words, that the victory the Taliban have secured in Afghanistan is a victory for them all, meaning that he must have been thinking about the various pockets of terrorist groups that make up what is actually happening, or that has always been there in existence in Afghanistan. Because as at yesterday, I heard from my commentator in the United States that there are about 20 or more of such terrorist groups resident in Pakistan alone, and most of them through all the southwest frontier province, Peshawar and all these other areas, always come into Afghanistan to create problems and wreak havoc. You can see that this ISIL-K terrorist group had been resident in Pakistan and was able to easily move into Afghanistan and caused this problem we saw recently at the Kabul international airport, while America and the Allied forces were making consistent and concerted efforts to lift their nationals out of Afghanistan. It is estimated that about 123,000 members of the U.S. community and other allied countries have been lifted to safety, and then a good number of them are still remaining, trapped in Afghanistan for now. So it is certain that what is happening in Afghanistan now will reverberate all over the Middle East and by extension to us in the Sahel and the sub-Saharan Africa, because as the world has developed, we don't need to travel too far before you know what is happening in the other end of the world. Even in Nigeria, Boko Haram, ISWAP, and other little pockets of terrorist groups are watching. And as they are watching, they are also trying to draw lessons from what is happening there and to refine, redefine, and then re-strategize to see how they can also make progress. Because these are not regular forces. These are not people who work for a purpose. They are just like what we used to study in those days, the armor rabbits, who are people who go for spoils. They do not want to see anything good, because I do not understand why the Taliban, having been in government for a very long time in Afghanistan, but pushed aside by the Allied forces led by the United States of America, trying to come back now and trying to jubilate that they have come back to continue from all the evils and all the wrong things they were doing to that country. So my own perception is that I do not see how the Taliban can start a government that will be recognized by most countries of the world, a government that will be able to solve the imminent problems on the ground in Afghanistan. They have to reconstruct the place, they have to reconstruct the economy, they have to rebuild a credible government that will be acceptable and recognized by most countries of the world, which is going to be a problem. So like Ambassador Danladi just said, there is the possibility that there will be another outbreak of war that may be worse than even what happened within the time the Taliban are holding sway. Because it is not just easy for them to come and settle down and start governing. The economy is in shatters. People were queuing up, trying to withdraw some little money from their bank accounts to be able to find their ways out of that place, because this is a period of uncertainty in that country. No, anything can happen. Like you said, America has not gone too far. They are still hanging around. They just moved their embassy to Qatar to have an eye on what is happening in Afghanistan. And if there are any reasons for them to come back and hit major targets, they will do that without any form of reluctance. So I foresee a situation where Afghanistan will become a theater of war in no time, because there is no rocket science in the Taliban's just settling down within the shortest possible time and moving ahead with the governance of that country.
Well, thank you. You know, if war breaks out in Afghanistan, and we've been discussing about the issue of a spillover and other terrorist group operating in the Sahel and even in Nigeria, you know, borrowing the lead from what is happening there, and even having access to some weapons, and even directive from some of those, you know, terrorists operating in Afghanistan. Now, as you rightly said, America has not gone too far, and they even promised to return, because they said those who bombed the airport, the gate of the airport, that got 13 American soldiers dead, that they're going to retaliate. They have said that a number of times. And again, the Afghan's foreign reserve has also been freezed, you know, by America. Now, that brings us to the issue of the roles that we played by surrounding nations, you know, in Afghanistan. Now you have a number of terrorists, Afghan terrorists living in Pakistan. Just 2 days ago, 2 Pakistani soldiers were killed just at the border between them and Afghanistan. So already there is tension. Now, Professor Zabadi, the Taliban are seeking for manpower assistance. As a matter of fact, they even asked Qatar to give them some of their Air Force personnel to man Kabul airport, because they don't have the personnel to do that. Do you foresee a situation where assistance could really come to the Taliban for that group to be able to establish a stable government in Afghanistan?
Yes, I do. I mean, like I said, neighbors and not so neighbors that are interested in Afghanistan and are probably also friendly towards the Taliban as a group will want to come to their aid. I mean, it's not just Qatar, Pakistan itself, China. Don't forget that the regional configuration there is such that China is friends with Pakistan and India is not friends with them. Iran is there, again, from the religious point of view, to watch over the interest of Shia group. And then up north, we talked about the Tajiks, the Uzbeks. The Russians are interested in making sure that this extremism does not overflow the borders and disturb the area that used to be known as the Soviet Central Asia. So all these interests are there, and they will help or make trouble for the Taliban if the Taliban do not keep to their promise to be inclusive. Now, what I think that we also need to take into account is what the United Nations is likely to do. And the Taliban will be better advised to actually work closely with the United Nations. I know that the permanent members, China, Russia may be on one side, the US and France and the UK may be on the other side. So that will be another area of contestation for influence and for decisions that favor the future of Afghanistan led by the Taliban. But I see that they can get immediate help. How sustainable that is will depend also on the dynamics on the ground. And that is already, like I said, a nightmare. There are several groups that are contesting for their own turf based on their ethnic backgrounds and so on. And, you know, the issue of will Taliban forgive and forget, right? Those are all issues, questions in the air, and people who are concerned are being cautious. So I'm not sure that you're going to have a floodgate of assistance and what have you to Afghanistan. You probably will have slightly the opposite. With the time the Americans spent in Afghanistan, they've got leverage. We've talked about the financial dimension where, you know, accounts have been frozen or what have you. And already the World Bank has stopped funds going that direction. So you can imagine that any institution, financial institution where the United States has influence would simply just shut the door for now against the future government of Afghanistan.
I don't know. See, Professor Estefanos and Dr. Aduku, sometimes you get concerned about the kind of, if you like, knee-jerk reactions from leading global powers with regard to what's happening. Now, if you are saying you're going to deny the Taliban's access to the purse strings of Afghanistan, who suffers? Is it the Taliban as a government, or is it the citizens, that will suffer? We already see the queues that we have seen in that location. If the World Bank says, okay, we are freezing our intervention in Afghanistan in the meantime, who suffers? Let us assume it is the government that suffers. Does that then not push the Taliban government, once it's able to settle into alternative sources of funding? For instance, seeking to exploit the opium business, such as we've been talking about, gentlemen.
Yes. I was just trying to think of this option, of this opium business that has been known in that region for so many years, so many centuries in the past. Because it is the way the situation plays out that determines how the new Afghan government will function. If the special drawing rights of every country in the International Monetary Fund setup has been frozen, and the Taliban government, the new Taliban government in Afghanistan, will not have even access to money. From records and the discussions I listened to recently, the amount of money Afghanistan has in the U.S. banks is about $9.8 billion. And if they are not allowed access to that money, how do they function? It means that place is going to return again as a breeding pad for terrorists and terrorism. All the efforts America had made and the Allied forces have made in the past 20 years to chase out Al-Qaeda, chase out as many terrorist organizations out of Afghanistan will come to naught. Because if the people do not have what they require to run a stable and stable government, it means they'll have to resort to whatever is available to them. Then it throws also a lot of challenges to the countries within the sub-region there, especially Pakistan. Pakistan has always been on the side of Afghanistan for a very long time. You can see that most of the operating terrorist groups in Afghanistan today are based even in Pakistan. In fact, Mr. Danla decided a while ago. But then you can see that a new government of this type requires a lot of assistance from all sides to function. Yes, they have made promises that they are going to run an inclusive government. Yes, they are going to give back rights to women. In the announcement they made yesterday by their spokesperson, said that women are even allowed to return to work. Initially, they had said for now women should stay out of everything happening, they should stay back. But they are beginning to realize that they cannot continue that way. If it is a ploy to gain international recognition, I may not be able to say. But then they are beginning to understand on their own that outright display of terrorism or using that place again as a launching pad will still attract the the misgivings and, of course, the aggression of many other countries within that area, especially America, will still say, okay, if we had spent 20 years trying to make sure we protect human rights, we introduce some semblance of democracy, it has not worked, and these people are going back again to what it was before the 20-year unending war, as it is described, started, then America might decide to do something otherwise. Like I did say earlier, America had not totally withdrawn. The United States and the Allies have not totally withdrawn. They just noticed that they had spent 20 consecutive years with huge sums of money training the Afghan National Defense Force, which relied so much on American help to function. By now, 20 years is enough time to consolidate a government and even request that the Americans should go so that they can run their own affairs. But they, like we said, we have all seen, corruption was rife. Soldiers at a point there had to be paid directly by the U.S. and Allied forces as the money they voted for, salaries were being diverted to other places. So it is not just Afghanistan, like you asked, alone that will suffer. The countries within the immediate neighbors, Iran, Iraq, Pakistan, and co, and by extension to India, we have to bear the brunt of whatever is playing out in Afghanistan. And that is my own thinking, because there's no way the Afghan government can settle down and function without the necessary funds, the necessary assistance, and then another form of, system that they may introduce to be able to rebuild and start afresh from what the Americans left behind just yesterday.
All right, thank you indeed. Professor Akintanewa, we actually lost a Zoom connection a while ago, and we're glad that you are back. You are actually at your opening comment, before that happened. I would like you to continue from where you stopped, if you can still recall. Let's get your own take on what played out and still playing out in Afghanistan, and the ripple effect that may have, in terms of terrorist activities, in not just in Afghanistan, but also in Nigeria and the Sahel.
Thank you for the restoration. I can link the various points raised by the other interlocutors with the opening remarks. Ambassador Dauda was simply that the situational reality in Nigeria is not in any way different from what obtains in Afghanistan. And therefore, there is the need for a great caution to prevent the Afghanization of Nigeria. Now, I made that observation simply because in Afghanistan, those that are fighting themselves are in character anti-Taliban government. And when we are talking about how to prevent, how not to Afghanize Nigeria, then the issues must be objectively looked at. First of all, let's look at the issue of credibility that have been raised. Credibility is less important internationally than it is at the domestic level. The Taliban government needs credibility at the level of those warring against it. It was mentioned that we have more than 20 terrorist groups within Afghanistan. That is a truism. But the three most important of them that have been playing active parts, they include the Northern Alliance, that is the Panjshir Valley. You have the Al-Qaeda. You have the ISIS-K. ISIS-K was the one that originated the bombing attack at the airport. Now, when you take a look at this, if Afghanistan is already divided against itself within, then the Taliban government must be required to convince those fighting it beyond every reasonable doubt for peace to reign within Afghanistan. Peace will not come from outside. So we need to first of all remove the obstacles to national understanding at the level of Afghanistan. Now, international credibility. I do agree. The issue is that the principles of recognition of government as distinct from recognition of states is also there. If you are not recognized as a legitimate government, then you cannot easily relate in international diplomacy. The problem now is that the Taliban government has made it clear that it is prepared to respect the agreements, the principles reached with the coalition forces, and particularly with the United States. In this case, if the Taliban succeeds to a large extent, at least more than 50%, to comply with the humanitarian aspects, the credibility will be there. Please let me draw your attention to the contents of the United Nations Security Council resolution that was adopted on Monday. That resolution clearly reflects the new Cold War in the making. We have 15 members voting. 13 voted for the resolution. 2 voted against. And who are the 2 countries? They are the representatives of China and Russia. So when you look at this, look at the arguments they also raise. China argues that it is the problem of withdrawal, the US withdrawal, that is the problem. That is the issue to be addressed. And that withdrawal does not imply an end to responsibility, that everybody still has responsibility to put this, to bring the problem to rest. Russia said that, Russia argued along a parallel line to say some other international terrorists, some other organization of terrorists have been excluded from the resolution, and therefore they abstained. Meaning now that the permanent members are divided against themselves. The implication there is this. When the question was asked, and Professor Zabadi was trying to explain the extent to which there could be assistance or not, he was quite right. The issue is that the Americans and their allies will certainly provide assistance, even if the Chinese and Russia refuse. But if it's going to be collectivized, if it is going to be done on the basis of the principle of collective defense, then you can expect the use of veto, either by Russia or by China. So in this case, the bottom line is that the Taliban government, like Professor Zabadi said, or whether it was said by Dr. Adugu, that the Taliban government will need to work within the framework of the United Nations. That is how we can have a new way forward. And in terms of implication for Nigeria, I try to say that, look, no one should take the Boko Haram of Nigeria for granted. No one. The issue is that the Boko Haram we know in Nigeria includes the Boko Haram in the blood of Al-Qaeda, in the blood of ISIS-K, in the blood of Northern Alliance. The international terrorists may answer different names, but they have a common interest. And the issue in this case is that Nigeria must look at how the Boko Haram within the government of Goodluck Jonathan and President Muhammadu Buhari have succeeded in going to the Nigerian Defense Academy. So, for whatever reason, nobody should take any sudden invasion attack on Aso Rock. We should not be giving excuses. This is the time the Aso Rock must be strongly fortified and ensure that Aso Rock is free of whoever is the Boko Haram agent there. They need to work closer because as it is, and I will conclude on that, the current international challenge is how to determine where the next attack will be. Africa has been identified as the next place to host, you know, all the roaming terrorists. If you remove all the terrorists from Afghanistan, from Yemen, from Syria, from Somalia, we still have pockets of them there. Where are they going to? It has been argued that Nigeria should be the next place. So the government of Nigeria should first of all focus on how to prevent Nigeria becoming the terra cognita of international terrorism than even fighting the Boko Haram on ground. This is the issue. We are in a very dangerous area, and we should not allow this to complicate those who are also agitating for self-determination and secession. So there are different battlefields of threats confronting the Buhari administration.
All right, thank you very much, Professor Bola Akintarewa, there for your explanation. Let's also bring in Ambassador Dauda Danladi for his comments on this. Ambassador Danladi, well, I know I would like you to also comment on what should be the Nigerian government's interest in what is unfolding in Afghanistan, and how we can keep an eye, for instance, on the flow of illicit weapons, because all those AK-47 you see being wielded by Taliban elements, they will have to be decommissioned at some point anyway when they begin to run a proper government, and how to also freeze the linkages between Boko Haram, ISIS or ISWAP, West African province, and all that, so that you tell us. But I don't know whether we will still have a Zoom connection to you. While you are answering those questions, there's something that I've always found very curious about Afghanistan. I mean, it's a never land, as it were. But when you look at the roads, at least the roads that I see on television, in Kabul, those roads are well paved. When you also look at the roads that link Afghanistan to some of the neighboring countries, when they were having supply disruptions, those highways are also well paved. How do you explain that a country that had been perpetually at war is still able to have good roads in Kabul and then, of course, on the international highways?
Well, thank you very much. I think I will start on the lighter side. It's true. It's actually mind-boggling that today, if you have 8,600 Afghani currency, you exchange it to $1, which means $100. You get if you have 86,000 Afghani currency, you get $100. Look at the if you compare it with what the exchange rate is in Nigeria, that's relatively more peaceful. Then it is mind-boggling. But I think that's something for our financial institutions to address. But really, the fallout of what has happened or what is happening in Afghanistan is a wake-up call, really, for the federal government to look at its regional agreements, especially the agreement made by ECOWAS to control the proliferation of light weapons within the ECOWAS region. I think we must commend Mr. President, because I think about a month ago, the president directed the full implementation of the action plan on the control of small arms, light weapons. And in that document, member countries were supposed to pool their assets to provide a robust border surveillance, because the fallout, as has been observed by Professor Bola, yes, the fallout, as observed by Professor Bola, there could be linkages through the Arab Maghreb to link up with Boko Haram and ISWAP fighters. There could be exhibitions in the ongoing kidnapping that has become a menace to our educational system. So we need to ensure that we mobilize regional support to implement some of the treaties that will mitigate illicit trafficking of drugs and light weapons. Going forward, I think there will be the need also to strengthen our multinational joint task force. Member countries contributing to the multinational task force should, the states should be made to at least contribute their quota, which will see more vibrant responsiveness from member states of the multinational joint task force. As you know, over 3 million people were displaced in the Chad Basin, and mitigating and consolidating on the gains that have been recorded so far is very, very critical at this point in time. The other issues is the Borno State governor has been doggedly trying to resettle tens of thousands of displaced persons, and has also, in collaboration with the federal government, put in place the safe corridor policy for surrendered Boko Haram elements. I think there's a need to rally around to come out with a strategic, robust action plan for resettlement, de-radicalization, and for putting in place and mobilizing all our leaders from the local government to the top on the need to educate our people, to provide necessary education for them to know the inherent dangers in not supporting the federal government to deal with the menace of insurgency.
All right. Thank you very much indeed. We hope that the connection will still stay while we take a short break, so that when we come back, we'll continue with the conversation. There are so many areas that we need to also talk about. I think he also raised part of it, by talking about regional support to mitigate illicit traffic in firearms, and ammunition, which of course is the bane of our security system today. This is Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the NTA. We'll take a short break now. When we come back, we'll continue with the conversation. All right, well, thank you for staying with us up till this moment. Let's turn to Dr. Clement Aduku this time around. Professor Ambassador Danladi raised very pertinent issues, when he was, answering the last question, put to him, and that has to do with what can be done in Nigeria to ensure that Nigeria is not Afghanized. Let me use the word with respect to.
No, that was said by Professor Akintewa.
Akintewa. All right. Now, how do we ensure that? Because if our guests are very curious about what happened in Afghanistan, that could happen in any other country in the world, Nigeria inclusive, then that means that now is the time to start mitigating whatever that could lead to the Afghan scenario. What, in your opinion, should government begin to do at the moment?
Okay, I think at this point in time, the government should realize one obvious fact, and that is that terrorism cannot be defeated through military actions alone. Yes, Nigeria could seek cooperation and assistance from the United States and some other friendly countries on how to mitigate the possible Afghanization, like the professor said, of Nigeria, which is not very likely by my own assessment because of obvious factors. I'll get to that later. As long as we come into grips with the fact that using military tactics alone cannot defeat terrorism in our country, then we have started on a good path. Secondly, Nigeria should also find a way of putting certain basic infrastructures in place. Yes, the money may not be there. COVID-19 has, hit every country in the world hard. Resources are no longer there as they were in the past. Attention has been diverted on how to, inoculate the population and reduce the effects of the pandemic, which is also another diversionary issue that makes many governments not focus on domestic and sometimes some international issues. Nigeria should also find a way to clip the wings of ISWAP operating alongside Boko Haram. Because from recent developments, we have seen that the people are not joking, and they are very keenly interested in what is happening in Afghanistan. And they're also re-strategizing, improving their modus operandi, and thinking of ways to maybe get up to the stage the Taliban have got in Afghanistan, God forbid. So the government has to look inwards. I was just thinking a while ago that so many basic infrastructures you find in Afghanistan, after being in the state of war for 20 years, we may not have them here, just because of several other challenges we have, which means it's not directed to one particular person or government or political party. It's just that we may not have all the resources which America had poured into Afghanistan to be able to calm down the situation. America didn't go to Afghanistan to engage in a forever wars, like they say. The idea was to, one, chase away Al-Qaeda, get rid of Osama bin Laden and all his terrorist cells all over the place, and then help the Afghan government to stay on their own. When people are blaming the U.S. and the Allied forces for pulling out on the 31st of August, I don't see any reason why they should remain there forever. So it is one of those things. So if we do not want a repeat performance or something close to that scenario in our own system, we should seek regional cooperation, especially in the northern flank of our borders, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Chad, and all these other Niger and co. Because if those areas remain porous, proliferation of arms and light weapons from Libya, from all these other areas where instability had been entrenched for so many years, will still throw so many challenges to us. Yes, it is obvious that these terrorist cells multiply. They're like amoeba, they replicate and move from one level to the other, but it can be contained. And I congratulate and appreciate the efforts of the Nigerian military and other paramilitary forces in checkmating the activities of that. One may not sit in the comfort of his room to see the enormous challenges we are facing from that perspective and the much work our men and women in uniform are doing. But it is a fact that if they were not up and doing, maybe by now our situation would have been probably worse than what is happening in Afghanistan. But thank God we are doing, the Nigerian government is doing its possible best to nip this problem at the border so that it does not deteriorate or degenerate even to the situation we are seeing now in Afghanistan.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Clement Adoku. Back again to Professor Estefanos Zabadi. Well, sometimes, we tend to forget that it was President George Bush Jr. who dragged America into Afghanistan 20 years ago. Of course, that followed the 9/11 attacks in Washington and New York. I recall then, when the debate was starting in the U.S., he said that he wasn't going to he wasn't going to direct the launch of $1 million missile into a desert that will hit at no target. And then all of a sudden, the military-industrial complex said, no, you just must move into Afghanistan, and the outcome is what we have seen in terms of what has said. Nobody talks about Al-Qaeda in terms of their structure anymore. After Osama bin Laden was taken out 10 years ago, al-Zawahiri was the second in command. He took over. Nobody says anything about him. But can we just possibly take a look at this? Assuming the Afghan authorities now, that's to say the Taliban, are able to put their act together and they go ahead with their previous harsh, if you like, is Sharia rule. Would that become an incentive, for instance, to other terrorist groups such as Boko Haram? Because Boko Haram, their own ideology of Islam is no to Western education. Can that then incentivize not just Boko Haram in Nigeria, but ISWAP, in the Sahelian region and elsewhere, that franchises may be issued?
No, one can say that there will be demonstration effect in Taliban coming back to take over power. But I will not go as far as to say, in fact, I do not think the Taliban are going to be like they were before. 20 years is long time enough for them to have understood some of the undercurrents in international relations, and they have also taken time to perhaps also review where they went wrong, having done some sort of after-action review. And they are having to move from a mentality of fighting war to capture an objective to now having to run a government. Now, Afghanistan did not stand still while Taliban was out of power. I mean, you have the issue of women, for instance. More women have not only come forward, have been trained, they are competent, they are experts in several fields, and they are there. The ground has shifted. The Taliban government will have to take that into account, and I think that will moderate what they are likely to do a bit. The point we have made earlier about the other groups who do not even want to see them there. Now statesmanship it will have to kick in on the side of the Taliban. If they fail at that, then I mean the worst scenario will unfold of endless violence. Civil war has been mentioned, and so on. Now, I wanted to say something looking at Nigerian situation now. There is an Afghan general by the name of Lieutenant General Sami Sadat. He wrote explaining why the Afghan military forces failed. And he gave, let me reduce the points he made to 3. 1, betrayal by the Americans. All those equipment and so on, they were contractor-based. The contractors had started leaving in July, and they had taken away the useful things. So those equipment are there, they cannot be used. The software and so on, they had gone. Now, the Afghan military depended on air power to be able to even function well on the ground. That had gone because from the time President Trump reached agreement with the Taliban, not with the Afghan government, they were doomed. So really, they did the best they could, but they were betrayed by the Americans at that level. They said, secondly, they were betrayed by the politicians at home. And I think the fact that the president ran away, you see, the president appointed him to come to Kabul and, take care of the place, and then left. So, but the other point he made is this: cronyism, corruption, bureaucracy. That this failed. So if we want to do something about Nigeria, that's the link I want to make. You have to have legitimacy in government. Yeah. Government has to be a legitimate government. So this is that...
Yeah, but foreigners will not come and solve our problems for us.
We have to do
that's basically the truth. We don't need foreigners to come and solve our problems. Yeah. But again, as our guests have really pointed out, it's important that we mitigate whatever, similar events in Afghanistan, in the nearest future. That is very important for us as a nation. Gentlemen, it's been wonderful hosting you this morning on this very important topic. And so I'd like to, first of all, appreciate Professor Isfanos Zabadi, Professor of International Relations and Dean of School of Postgraduate Studies at Brigham University, Cairo. Thank you indeed for coming this morning. Dr. Clement Onoja Aduku, Nigeria's former envoy to the Russian Federation and the Republic of Ukraine, is also wonderful talking to you today. We want to appreciate once again our guest via Zoom, Ambassador Dado Danladi, former Nigerian High Commissioner to Pakistan. We thank you for really staying with us up to this moment to talk to us on Good Morning Nigeria. You reached us from California. You can now go to sleep because, as Kinsley said, of course, you really showed up because of your concern for this nation. Also, via Zoom, we want to thank Professor Bola Akinterenwa, former Director General, Nigerian Institute of International Affairs, NIA. We also thank you for your contribution this morning. All right, you're still watching Good Morning Nigeria, and next is sports.
Japan was close to the world for 217 years, 1635 to 1852, due to a law known as Sokoku Edict. However, in 1852, the American Navy forced Japan to open her markets. The long period of isolation helped Japan to develop a unique culture and advance technologically. These technologies are what some Nigerians and other participants in Tokyo are benefiting today. Some of them reflect on Tokyo's capital city and the country's lifestyle.
Coming to Japan is my first time as well, and I really enjoy the way people behave, the environment by itself, though it's more of like, I can say more mechanical because of technology.
Tokyo is really very good. That due to pandemic, you cannot go out. But however, you are enjoying the village facilities, also in the stadium, the very good arrangement. And also people also very friendly and very good.
I must tell you that it's a good country, the people are nice, well-organized community, and above all, they are taking care of athletes properly at the Games Village. There have never been any cause to complain.
They facilitate you where you want to go. If you want to go to the Olympic Village, there are some people who guide you. If you want to go to your hotel, you have taxi, you have ticket taxi, so you have buses. So I think that very good facilities to move here.
It will be recalled that Kamakura was initially the de facto capital of Japan from 1185 to 1113.
All right, that's a tidbit there on Japan and its reopening to the world and what it is today. Well, thank you for being with us on Good Morning Nigeria today. The program returns tomorrow, same time, 7 in the morning. Until then, do look after yourself. I'm Kingsley Osadolo.
And I am Kirian Umayo. Do have a great day.